Hi there. My name is Ziebart with Plant-Based for Life. You are watching Quick Cooking Classes. Today we're going to be doing roasted vegetables, particularly French fries, and then a bunch of roasted starchy vegetables, as well as some other stuff in there. And then we'll have a marinade. And I'm going to talk a little bit about a previous episode where we made gravy. I have upgraded the recipe, and we'll share with you how I did that so that if you decide you want to substitute healthier ingredients in even your plant-based recipes, there's always a way to upgrade usually, then I will show you how to do that. So if you would, join me now in my kitchen. Welcome, welcome everyone. You are in Ziebart's kitchen. Today we're going to be doing French fries and roasted veggies and mushrooms. So I'm going to first start with the French fries. They're really the easiest and most straightforward recipe. Basically, I don't even add any seasoning to them because typically I'll have either a cheesy sauce or a gravy that I put on top. But if I am going to season them, my favorite one is Costco's brand of no salt seasoning. See that? This stuff is fantastic, really flavorful and really lovely. We're going to be using that for our marinade today as well. There are lots of different brands, varieties of no salt seasoning. So if you don't love this one, Mrs. Dash has approximately 30 or so. Keep in mind that Mrs. Dash sometimes adds sugar and other ingredients. So always, always, always read those ingredients, even if you're looking at a trusted brand. So let's talk a little bit about French fries. I chopped these up just a little bit ago. This is cold water in here. Now, I don't even do this stuff when I make my own French fries. I basically get my cookie sheet lined with parchment paper, and I just put them all on a single layer as I'm chopping them up. That's it. It's really, really straightforward and simple. But I have to tell you something about the way that I prepare my French fries. So if you do it this way, they do come out just a little bit crisper, which is nice. The other thing that you can do when I make my French fries this way, or just chopping them and putting them directly on the cookie sheet, they do come out a little bit dry, but they're nice and crispy, and that's how I like them. But if you like to have sort of a little bit more moist center, and you want to cook them for a shorter amount of time in the oven, so that'll create a more moist center and a crispy outside without drying it as much, then you can parboil these. So you can boil them for, no more than 5 minutes or so. If you do that before you cut them up, it makes it easier to just drain it and then throw it on your cookie sheet. Or you could pop these into your Instant Pot, or you can even bake them and then chop them up, but they're not going to look as pretty. They're going to be a little bit more mushy. And so this is the way I like to do them. I will show you at the end how they turn out, but all we really want to do then is put these things on as a single layer. You really don't need me to show you how to do that, but I am going to show you how to chop them. So these are basically considered like a steak fry, right? A little bit thick, but you could cut this in half and have, more of a shoestring kind of a fry. That would work just fine. Just do whatever works for you. The other thing to note is that whenever you chop things up a little bit smaller or thinner, they're going to cook more quickly. So if you're impatient like I am, you could make them even smaller than this. Like I could cut that in half. But let me just show you really quickly how to chop these into steak fry size. So you just want a russet potato. Now some of you are going to be tempted to peel it, but if you really want the most benefit out of your potato, and these are perfectly healthy, all the fiber and micronutrients included, leave the skin on if you can do it. If you're new to leaving the skin on, you can peel some of the skin off. I'm just saying there's a lot of good stuff in the skin. So we want to be very, very, very careful because this thing rolls around and this is sharp. So make it as stable as you possibly can, and then cut a little slice off the bottom. Now this is also going to be French fries, so you want them the proper thickness. You get to decide how thick you want these. 1/4 inch all the way up to, a 1/2 inch is about right. So I'm just going to do about like that. So now I have this slice, which I'm also going to turn into French fries, but now I can flip this over and this is rock steady. So much less likely to cut myself this way. But I want to continue to create the slices about the same thickness as this. So just slice, slice carefully, carefully. I don't want any chopped off fingers on my watch. Okay. So then all you want to do is take, you can do these a couple at a time, a couple layers at a time, and then just slice them as thin as you want. You do really, really thin. You can make them a little thicker. It's entirely up to you. What we do want though is uniformity as much as possible. It's not entirely possible because we're trying to make rectangles out of circles or ovals. And so that doesn't work 100%, but we do our best. Okay, there you go. French fries. Easy peasy, right? And then all you do is put them in a single layer on your cookie sheet. You're going to roast these at 425 for 20 minutes. Then you're going to check them. Check to see if they're as brown as you want them to be. If they're brown on the bottom, because the parchment paper does assist in the browning process. If they're brown on the bottom but not the top, you can throw on your broiler for a few minutes. Whatever you'd like to do. Another way to flavor these, which is kind of fun, is to soak them in a little, or sprinkle on top a little bit of your favorite kind of vinegar. We love malt vinegar because it reminds us of visiting the UK. So whatever you like, malt vinegar can also be sprinkled on top. It's very delicious that way. Any way that you'd like, just make sure that you do this all in a single layer. If any of your French fries are overlapping, they are going to stick to each other and you're going to miss the opportunity for more crispy browning. So I will show you a little bit later how the ones I made earlier turned out. I'm going to pop these in my cold water. Remember, when you chop potatoes, they start to oxidize. Now, tomorrow, for those of you who are watching live, we're going to be talking about oxidation when we do our Your Brain Nourish and Protect webinar for the Disease Prevention and Reversal webinar series. And so we're going to talk about oxidation. Basically, when certain things are exposed to oxygen, they start to break down. And that's what happens with things like potatoes and apples. They'll start to turn brown on you. So make sure if you're not going to cook them right away, that you have them completely covered in water. You can also use like citrus, like a little bit of lemon or something like that. That will also help. So really, that's it when it comes to French fries. That couldn't be easier. What we're going to do now, which is a little bit more involved, are the roasted veggies. So most of the time I cook on stainless steel. Stainless steel is one of the safest things to cook on and store things in, but I also like glass. So this is a nice big glass casserole dish that I really like. I am going to go ahead and put parchment paper on the bottom. Let's tuck it a little bit. And then we'll put our veggies on top of that. So I'm going to show you how to chop these veggies in just a minute, but let's go ahead and make our marinade first. Your marinade could literally be anything. So it's really up to your imagination what you'd like to do. I'm going to do a vinegar-based marinade, but if you wanted to just bring out the natural flavor of your roasted veggies, you could just use veggie stock. You could use red wine, lots of different things to kind of, the whole point is to keep your veggies moist and to allow them to soften as they roast. You know, previously you might have heard of folks using oil to roast. Remember, we don't like to use oil because it's a highly processed food. Fats are an essential part of our diet, but what we want are healthy fats. We want the healthiest version of fat. And we would really like to have that fat come in its original package, because whenever you consume fat, the healthy kinds of fat, remember those unsaturated, the MUFAs and the PUFAs. Monounsaturated, that's MUFA. Polyunsaturated, that's PUFA. So we want those MUFAs and PUFAs, but we want them as close to the way that nature, you know, gave them to us. So if you're gonna, you know, telling me that olive oil is good for you, okay, there are some polyphenols in olive oil, but it's also oil, which means that all of the fiber and most of the micronutrients have been removed from that oil. And what you're left with is just a pale version of the original awesome food, which is the olive. So if you want that good quality fat, then just eat those olives or eat avocados or eat, the better nuts and seeds. Okay. So as I said, this one is a vinegar based. So this is just about a half a cup of balsamic vinegar. Now, balsamic vinegar is extremely strong flavored. So if you don't want that, or if you don't like the color that it turns your vegetables, because it kind of turns it a reddy brown color, you'd rather the natural beauty of your butternut squash or whatever it is that you're cooking to come out, then use a lighter vinegar. Any kind of vinegar that you like. You like the flavor of it, especially if it's a little bit sweeter vinegar. Remember, watch out for added sugars. But if it's a slightly sweeter vinegar, that's a fun way to add good flavor to your roasted veggies. Or you could just mix in some seasoning with some veggie stock, and you'll get flavor, but you won't have the strong vinegar flavor. It's entirely up to you. So I've got half a cup of balsamic vinegar. One of my favorite dressing combinations when it's not a creamy dressing, because those are my real favorites, is Dijon plus balsamic. So I have a tablespoon of Dijon here, and Dijon mustard is fantastic. It's a little bit sharp, and it's just a lovely, I just really like it. I'm a big fan of mustards in general, but this one is one of my favorite go-tos. And so we want to add that. Okay, tablespoon. So I have a half a cup of balsamic vinegar, a tablespoon of Dijon, a tablespoon of nutritional yeast. This is great. So nutritional yeast adds flavor, and it also thickens a little bit. So this will add some depth of flavor and enrich this marinade for you. So that was a tablespoon. And I'm going to, again, add my no salt seasoning. Remember, Mrs. Dash makes a bunch. Garlic and herb is a good one to add to this, whatever you like. The other thing you could do, because this is plenty flavorful without even adding this, you could add other kinds of herbs and spices that you like. You can even add spicy spices if you're into that sort of thing. Add some spices that you know are really good for you, like turmeric or clove. Clove will give it a slightly sweet flavor, but that would be really good. It would taste like Thanksgiving, kind of. So, let your imagination take you away and get creative. Do your mad scientist thing in the kitchen. It's not all going to work out, but that's okay. That's okay. Because what we end up with is some fantastic recipes, some really creative and delicious and recipes that really bring us to the point where we're not even tempted by the less healthy stuff. So I'm just giving this a little bit of a whisk. Doesn't need too much, just to get that mustard and the seasoning mixed in. And then what I want to do is I want to have a brush or a little spoon handy. A little spoon, you can just scoop it. You can use a baster if you want to, but this little brush works just fine. This is a silicone brush. Now let's put this aside. Let this sit for a bit. The longer you let it sit, the more the flavors will marry. So if you want to make this ahead and pop it in the fridge, that's even better, but it's not necessary because this is going to marinate, or it's going to meld quite a bit as you're roasting in the oven. Okay, so when we're roasting veggies, what we want to do is we want to pick things that are kind of alike. So I've got some butternut squash here. So any of the kind of gourds or the pumpkins, squashes, those hard squashes, you want to cook those kinds of things together. I have a yam here, sweet potato, also very, very hard. If you were to put something like a summer squash in here or zucchini, those are very soft and they cook very, very quickly. So by the time this stuff is cooked, your zucchini is mush. So unless you like that sort of thing, unless you want that, I would stick to, hard with hard. That's the best way to go. But I am going to add more flavor items. So I'm going to do these two together. You could do carrots, potatoes, any kind of different color of potato. You could do other kinds of pumpkin squashes, acorn squash. All of those will go really, really good together. But what I have over here on this side are flavor contributors. So I have some red onion. So this adds a little bit of sweetness and beautiful flavor. Mix that all in together. Got a bunch of garlic. I'm going to smash that up and chop it into big chunks. And I've got some mushrooms. Now, mushrooms are fantastic because there's actually a lot of water in mushrooms. And as they cook, they just get more and more and more flavorful. So this is an excellent thing to mix in with your veggies, which are just a little bit lighter in flavor. Butternut squash is delicious all by itself. If you just cook this up and then blended it, it makes a lovely, luxurious soup that is delicious with very little added to it. But we want to punch up the flavors here. So we're going to add some onion, garlic, mushroom, and then we'll have our marinade as well, which has the balsamic vinegar, the nutritional yeast, the no salt seasoning combination, and the Dijon mustard. Okay. So when it comes to chopping these hard veggies, there is a trick because it's really easy to cut yourself if you're having to wrestle with getting the knife through these things. So what I did for the other half, I popped this whole thing in the microwave, and you can pop it in for 2 to 5 minutes. That's usually enough, and that will soften it just enough that you can get the knife through more easily. It's still quite hard, but you can see it's started to soften right there. So we want to scoop out these seeds. These seeds that come in any sort of hard squash, you can actually wash them, dry them, and roast them. And these are typically high in things like iron and calcium and tryptophan. So if you're having trouble sleeping, a handful of pepitas, any sort of squash seed that's been roasted, that's a great thing to have just before bedtime to help you get, sleep through the night. All right, so what we want to do is as soon as you have popped it in the microwave for 2 to 5 minutes, leave it for a minute or so because it gets quite hot. And, with microwaves, you're going to have weird hot spots. So let it just cool for a minute so you don't burn yourself. Then slice it lengthwise, which I've already done. I already roasted the other half so that I can show you later. Cut off the little stem part. Remember, let's see, it's still quite firm. Chop off this little end here. We want to scoop out those seeds. So just use a sharp spoon. And if you've put this in the microwave, this is going to be even easier. As if it's still warm, these scoop out really, really easily for you. Just give it a little bit of scrape so that you can get those fibrous little stringy bits that are attached to the seeds. Scrape, 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 scrape. If you've ever carved a pumpkin, then you know exactly what I'm doing here. Fortunately, this is a much smaller little space of seeds than a pumpkin. So that's good. That'll work for me. And as I said, you can wash off the fibrous parts and roast those seeds if you like. What we want to do is we want to remove this hard skin. Now, normally I would say eat skin if it's edible, and this is relatively edible, but it's really tough. And when you roast it, it gets even tougher. so we definitely want to peel that off. So just take a potato peeler, works great. And you just have to be a little bit patient as you peel this thing. Be a little firm and a little patient so that we get all the skin off. You can use a knife, but you are much more likely to cut yourself that way. And you'll waste a lot more of the squash because a knife is not as, you just can't get these thin strips that you can get with a potato peeler or something like this. So peel, peel, peel. You just got to get a little patient with this. Make sure to get that, at least that top layer off, because as I said, it is quite tough. Now, if you wanted to just roast this and eat it, this is also a good way to do this as well. So if you wanted to just roast this whole thing, you can. And we use this method when we're making things like spaghetti squash, because you don't want to chop that up before you roast it so that you get the nice long stringy spaghetti bits that you can then, put your sauce or marinara on after you roast it. But the same amount of time and the same preparation apply. So what you do with butternut squash or any kind of acorn squash or spaghetti squash is you cut them in half, and then you put them on, a cookie sheet or, any kind of dish like this on parchment paper, but you also want a little layer of water at the bottom. The water helps to steam it and keep it moist and won't let it dry out. And so that's why you need a marinade when you're roasting, because you don't want these things to get dry and chewy. You want them to get soft and luscious. And so you can do that with a whole squash as well. I absolutely love acorn squashes for things like holidays, because when you cut them in half across the middle, they have a beautiful kind of a star shape, and it just looks gorgeous. And then what I do, I'll just pretend this is an acorn squash. When you scoop out the center, you have a place to put stuffing. So you could make a wild rice stuffing or any kind of stuffing that you like and roast it inside that beautiful star-shaped squash. There's so many things we can do with different kinds of squashes. Experiment. Okay, so we've got it peeled. Again, when we're cooking these things, we want uniform sizes so everything cooks evenly. So be mindful of that, and be mindful of the fact that the smaller the pieces, the faster it's all going to cook. So it's still a little bit hard, so be careful. Keep those fingers out of the way. Be firm, but also cautious. Okay, you saw how pretty tough that is still. Now, I only put mine in for 2 minutes because I'm impatient like that. If you put it in for a couple minutes longer, or up to the 5 minutes I suggested, then it'll be even easier to slice for you. It won't be cooked all the way through, but it will be just a smidge softer. So very careful, especially with this last slice. So you have less stability. Okay. All right, we did it, and we still have all of our fingers. Yay! Okay. So what I'm going to do now is cut it the other way, just so that we have the chunk size that we want. For me, that's good. If you have any kind of larger pieces, you can cut them in half. Like that one's kind of big. Put that one in half. Okay, now, as we're cutting this up, I'm just going to put them straight into the pan. But the other thing that you can do is actually stir them in with a bit of your marinade before, so that it covers everything. I'm just going to use the basting method, so that I'm just going to put them in just the way they are, and then use my brush to put on the marinade. But if you wanted to make sure that this whole thing is covered first, you can put some in a bigger bowl and then just toss them with your flavors. All right. But for me, it's all just going plunk in the pan. Make sure to spread them out. You could do even smaller sizes than this. Like that's pretty big. That is probably a really good size. Maybe an inch all the way around. All right, we are good to go. Now we've got our butternut squash done. So that was a half of a medium-sized, smallish butternut squash, and look at how much we got out of it. It's really, really good value. When you're talking about saving on your grocery bills, these are really good options. Very, very filling. You get a lot out of one. They sit on the counter and they stay good for you for what feels like forever. So go ahead and give those a try if you haven't already. Sorry, there's a couple of bigger chunks in here. I just want to make sure to cut those down a smidge. Now, we have a sweet potato or yam, and I do want to peel this one as well. You can eat the skin of this. The only time I really like to eat the skin, again, this is really tough skin, but if you roast it by itself with the skin up, or the skin on parchment paper, then it will get crispy on you. And that's actually pretty good. So if you have good flavor on it and it gets a little bit crispy, you can actually eat it. Or you can slice it so that the skin is thin and so not as noticeable than if you were to take a big bite like this. So for today, we're going to peel it. Anytime you can leave the skin on, do, because there are extra nutrients in there. There is good fiber. Remember, nutrients in fruits and vegetables tend to gravitate toward the outside. So if you are going to peel things, make sure you use a good quality peeler and try not to use a paring knife where you waste a lot of the food and the good nutrients. So again, we want to, I have already sliced off the end of this because I used part of it earlier. So I have a nice stable surface. And then you just want to try and make them about the same size as your other pieces. Again, careful with the fingers. Excuse me just a moment. I can smell those veggies. And I will show you those in a little bit. It is absolutely fantastic smelling. And they are glorious. So I have beautiful flavor. They're nice and soft. I will show you those in just a little bit. They are quite dark in color. As I said, if you want a lighter color, then just use a lighter color vinegar, or don't use vinegar, use something else. So let's throw these all in the pan. We want to kind of spread them out so they're not all in the same place, that we got them all over the pan. And again, that was basically half of a sweet potato, and you get a lot out of it. There's just so much in these little hard veggie jewels. Okay, so now I have a red onion. Just gonna lop off this little end here. And again, I want them about the same size pieces. So I'm gonna cut this thing into thirds this way, and then about the same distance this way. And, you know, some of them are going to break apart, and that's perfectly fine, perfectly fine. If some of them stay together, that's perfectly fine too. They will all cook through. And so we want to scatter these around, because this onions, red onions are a little bit lower in water than other kinds of onions, but onions are very high in water. And so the fluid that's in these veggies, we will sort of seep into their neighbors. Let's break it up a little bit. Don't get too crazy with it. Just kind of spread it around. The other thing we're going to add for flavor is garlic. Just give those a bit of a smash with the outside of your knife, and then just wiggle those out of their skins. If you have one of those fancy roly things or a garlic press, then that's great too. But I'm actually going to recommend against mincing these too small, because if garlic is overcooked, it gets bitter. So we don't want that. So I've got a little knobby piece that will not let go. Let go of that. Okay. And just wiggling them out of their skins. That sounds a little weird. Oop, that's a bad one. Okay, that's okay. And it's okay if they're a little bit broken up, because we're going to do that anyway. Ooh, these guys just don't want to get nude for me. Okay, there we go. All right, I'm just going to cut off a little piece of this because it looks a little bit meh. All right, and then just big chunks. You know, that's actually probably good. Like that. And then just spread them around like you did with the onions. And garlic, when it's roasted, as long as it doesn't burn, it gets nice and soft and sweet. And so it'll flavor its neighbors here in the pan, and it'll be delicious when you bite into it, instead of being very, very sharp as it is when it's raw. All right, so let's go ahead and do the mushrooms. I already rinsed these a bit. And again, we want chunks that are about the same size. matters a little bit less with the mushrooms because they are going to get softer than everything else. And that is okay. That is desirable in this situation. So I'm just quartering them, not getting too fancy with it. Try to spread it out in the dish because again, the water that comes out of your mushroom is going to keep all of the other veggies moist and is going to add flavor as it cooks. And that's probably good, like that. I'm very, very pleased with that. So what we've got in our pan is, fairly tightly packed. You don't want it to be too spaced out or else things are going to dry out on you. You do want a little bit of room so that everything cooks nice and evenly. So what we're going to do now is these are just veggies and mushrooms, right? So the first thing I want to do is take my marinade and do the initial brush. So again, you could do this with wine, you could do it with water, even you could do it with veggie stock, whatever. But this is my choice. Now, what's going to happen, you'll see, it's like I'm painting it brown, right? These will get very dark brown. They'll caramelize, the veggies will caramelize, and the balsamic will reduce, and everything will just get a lot darker. If that is not appealing to you, if you'd rather have these bright colors, then just use a lighter colored marinade. Don't have to get too fancy with it. I just want a light coat over everything. It just helps to protect those top pieces from drying out. Everything underneath won't dry out because it's got its own moisture and the moisture from the onions and the moisture from the garlic and the moisture from the mushrooms. But this top layer can dry out if you don't make sure to keep it moist. So we are going to roast this stuff for about 40 minutes, depending on how hot your oven is, anywhere from, and depending on how small your pieces are, remember that's a factor too, can be anywhere from 30 minutes to an hour, depending on if you have really big pieces or a lot in your pan. So we just keep basting it. Every few minutes, we pop open the oven, brush it again. And then once we're getting close to thinking that we're done, we take a fork and pierce one of our hard veggies. The mushrooms will already be soft, so that's not going to help you. Pierce one of these hard veggies, and of course they're very hard right now. But if they go in easily, then they're done. So that is basically it. Then it's just time and checking on it occasionally and throwing some more marinade on there. I'm going to go ahead and pop these in the oven. And I'm going to show you what they look like. So as I said, they turned out really, really dark. They're so nice and lusciously soft. And so flavorful. That marinade, it's a little bit sweet. It's nice and tangy from the vinegar. The veggies are nice and soft and luscious. This turned out beautifully. Those red onions are going to be delicious. They have a little caramelization on them. This is going to be really, really good. Now, I love this level of cooking. But if this looks like it's too much for you, then just take it out sooner. Just make sure that your harder veggies are fork tender. So, excuse my eating. If you put your fork in, it goes in easily, then you're good to go, just like cooking potatoes. All right. One more thing I wanted to show you today was if you watched the last episode, or if you've seen the gravy video, we made gravy last week. And we made two recipes. One was sort of a healthier version. Sorry, my handle is really hot. We made a healthier version, and then we made a super fast, more luscious, creamy version. So the healthy version is fantastic. It's full of carrots and celery and deliciousness. This, and mushrooms, that one was really, really good. Very, very healthy. This was a cashew-based one. And what it has in it is the original recipe calls for cashews, water, cornstarch, and some flavoring. Instead of the cornstarch, which is a very refined starch, which is going to go very rapidly into your system, I used brown rice flour. You can use chickpea flour, keeping in mind that chickpea flour makes things thicken very, very quickly, so you might have to add more liquid. So I used a tablespoon of brown rice flour instead of the cornstarch, and I used a half a cup of hemp seeds instead of the cashews. Now, hemp seeds, you know, they still have quite a bit of fat in them, but they have a really nice omega-3 ratio, omega-3 to 6 ratio. And look at how luscious it turned out. So I'm very, very pleased with that. And I already tried it with one of my French fries and it was delicious. So let me show you how my French fries turned out. See how they browned and they crisped up? They're really, really glorious. Now, remember, this is cooked right from in the oven, right from raw. If you want them to be a little bit softer in the center, you can boil them for a few minutes first and then bake them. But I like it just like this. When they're dry like this, they absorb your sauces really nicely. Yum. Fries and gravy. All right, that is it for today. I want to thank you so, so much for joining me for quick cooking classes. We'll see you all next time. Bye.